The name of this organization, which was probably the issue that caused us the most trouble, actually, it's called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
You are now watching episode 2 of the ARC Files. Now, a quick recap. The ARC is an international consortium started by Dr. Jordan Peterson.
I set up an international consortium.
And has been named the ARC. And the ARC stands for the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship. Now, I already did one episode, and in that episode I covered, let's pull it up here, how the ARC was thought into existence, the thought process of the ARC and the people within it, and why they chose London as their first meeting place. So if you want to catch up with that, I'm going to link something right up here where you can click and you can go catch up on that first episode. But if you've already seen it, let's get into episode 2. We're going to be covering why the ARC and other names before it. And I'm going to show you a document that's very interesting. I don't think anybody has put this on display yet. I think I'm the first person to do so, if I say so myself. The vision and principle of the ARC, why attractive and why voluntary. Quick explanation there. A big thing that Dr. Peterson has stressed is that he wants participation from the public, but he wants it to be voluntary.
No one's forced to do it. So that's the other thing. No compulsion.
He doesn't want people forced into this. He wants them to come because they want to be a part of it. So he's going to be explaining that, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with the hopeful vision of the ARC. That is what we're covering. Let's get into it.
The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We like that name because, well, if you're a citizen, then you're an autonomous individual. And if you're a responsible citizen, then you're the kind of autonomous individual that can take care of yourself and maybe some other people, and that would be a good thing. And if it's an alliance, then, well, the implication there is that citizens who are responsible can aggregate in something approximating responsible groups that also take responsibility for developing responsible citizens. ARC, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And the acronym is ARC, and ARC is a good acronym. It has echoes of the Ark, the biblical Ark, which is a container that allows people to withstand the trials and tribulations of life, to navigate through the flood, and to preserve. And ARC is also, it's like there's a lifetime arc, which is the trajectory moving forward. And so ARC's a good name. And so we had to scrap about that a fair bit, but the consequence of that was, well, a name that made everybody happier than all the other names that we had put forward.
So I'm going to show you something right now. You're never going to see it on another channel. You're just not, because nobody's going as deep as I am into this stuff, because I'm a Peterson geek, I guess you could say. But here is a certificate of incorporation on name change. So just really quick, we're just going to look at this. So it was called, at the beginning, it was called Prosperity UK 2017. Then the name got changed to what we know it as now, as Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Limited. Now, I dug a lot deeper into this, and I found some very interesting things, and I'm just going to make a whole other video for it because it's a bit of a rabbit hole. But I just wanted to show you guys that it's called the ARC today, but all the way back in 2016, it was actually called Prosperity UK 2017. And that company had its own function, which again, I will get into on another episode because it goes pretty deep. But for now, I want to jump into the vision and principle of the ARC.
We're trying to put together something like an alternative vision of the future, say an alternative to that kind of apocalyptic narrative that's being put forward, at least implicitly, by organizations like the WEF.
I don't have too many remedies. The remedies have to be discussed through dialogue by the stakeholders of our global system, but I just see the need for such a dialogue, and I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
After thinking about it a lot, we realized it would be better to put forward the an invitation to participate in a discussion that centered on a number of questions. The questioning approach is a better one because it's an invitation rather than a top-down imposition of the principles that must be.
The reason I put those clips side by side was so you could see an example of principle and vision between the ARC and the WEF. And I think I made it pretty clear. See, one leader was talking about an invitation, was talking about inviting the public to answer these questions, was talking about dialogue, was talking about communicating and figuring this thing out together. Meanwhile, the other leader was just talking about what he sees necessary, what must be, in the words of Dr. Peterson, what must be. I see the need for a great reset. Asking no one, telling us exactly what needs to happen.
We also decided that one of our guiding principles would be that we're not going to formulate policies that would require compulsion or the imposition of state power to implement. So, like, here's an example. We should be exhaustively searching through the universe of possible sources of energy so that we can provide a diversity of possibilities on the energy front. But we do not believe that anyone has the right to compel people into absolute poverty by increasing energy prices to hypothetically achieve some environmental goal. It's like, you want to put forward renewables, you're concerned about industrial pollution, no problem. But you don't get to do that as a matter of compulsion on the backs of the world's poor.
The electricity bill, it's unbelievable. I used to pay about €70 per month, and now I'm paying about €200.
At home, I try to put the washing machine and the dishwasher like in weekends because it's half price, not half price, but cheaper. And also at night after 12. And also we put 2 sweaters instead of 1.
Someone does have to pick up the bill, and that figure that has to pick up the bill, it's the government. So the difference between the government's cap at 2,500 and Ofgem's cap is being borne, the cost is being borne effectively by the taxpayer, and it's a huge amount of money. We don't know exactly how much this intervention is going to cost because we don't know what wholesale energy prices are. But some forecasters are saying that this could cost us in the region of about £38 billion over 18 months.
Not only because that will be very, very, very hard on poor people and will, even according to the World Bank's own projections, put 100 million or more at risk of starvation, but will also be counterproductive on the environmental front, because if you stress people too badly, they're going to start acting impulsively, maximize the short-term return, and you're going to produce environmental devastation. That's exactly what happened, by the way, in Sri Lanka.
Starting with the latest updates coming in from Sri Lanka, as the island nation's inflation hit a 9th consecutive record in June. With this, the Sri Lankans are forced to use firewood for cooking purposes. These desperate measures come as Sri Lanka struggles to arrange for basic essentials such as gas or fuel for its citizens. The world is moving forward with adopting cleaner sources of energy. But in Sri Lanka, the case seems to be quite different, as 22 million Sri Lankans are now forced to use firewood.
It certainly happened to Germany to some degree as they pursued idiot green policies. Now they have energy prices that are 4 to 5 times as much as they were.
Yeah, so we are really in dire straits on the gas market in Germany. Prices have been skyrocketing. Consumers will soon feel this in their pockets as well, as there's the new gas levy, and so prices will be increased for end consumers as well. And then we have ambitious targets to save energy over the winter, and that can bring us over the winter. Storage stocks are pretty healthy at the moment, but storage is only enough to cater for roughly 2 to 3 months of consumption. So we have to save consumption as well in Germany.
Where the power supply is much more unreliable, they're beholden to the Russians, which turned out to not be very wise, and they're polluting more rather than less. So even by their own standards, it's been an abject failure. We're not walking down that route. No compulsion involved in this enterprise. And we'd like to have the voluntary assent of the people governed, you know, like you might in a democracy. Now, that's hard to do on the international scale because we don't have the processes put in place to do widespread public consultation. but we can at least move in that direction to the degree that that's possible. We're going to throw this enterprise open to public participation as we can manage. And we're going to try to make everything we do as transparent and decentralized as possible. So in any case, we met a number of times, in person and online, and we decided that we were going to put forward a series of questions, and we agreed on the main areas that we would derive the questions from. And we know, and this is part of being transparent, we know perfectly well that if you're having a discussion, what the discussion is the key issue. And so if you control the questions, you haven't abandoned all governance or principles. You've established the playing ground. But you can't just have everyone talk about everything. That isn't going to work. And so what we're striving to do is to get a balance between the imposition of structure, a game-like structure, let's say, that everyone would like to play, and the acquisition of information. And we are offering these questions genuinely to see what we can all come up with as answers to the questions. And we're hoping that the vision that would emerge as a consequence of answering these questions would be compelling enough to people so that they would voluntarily get on board. No compulsion.
I don't know about you, but to hear Dr. Peterson talk about the questions that they're trying to ask so many times without actually telling you the questions is just so I can't stand by and have that happen. So we're actually going to go over the questions pretty quickly, but still to give you guys a gist. You can pause it if you want so you can actually look at them. Well, how'd that even happen? I didn't even click. Okay, let's get into it. Question 1, vision and story. Can we find a unifying story that will guide us as we make our way forward? Let's jump on here. I'm not even on the website. There you go. Question 2. How do we facilitate the development of a responsible and educated citizenry? Never heard that word before. Don't kill me in the comments. People get so upset when you haven't heard of words before. Let's go. Question 3. Family and social fabric. What is the proper role for the family, the community, and the nation in creating the conditions for prosperity? Question 4. Free enterprise and good governance. How do we govern our corporate, social, and political organizations so that we promote free exchange and abundance while protecting ourselves against the ever-present danger of cronyism and corruption? That's a great question. We have not answered that question in a long time in our world. Question 5, energy and resources. How do we provide the energy and other resources upon which all economies depend in a manner that is inexpensive, reliable, safe, efficient, including the developing world? Question 6, environmental stewardship. How should we take the responsibility of environmental stewardship seriously? Before we move on, a real quick breakdown of what I heard their principles are, or their vision even, is definitely no compulsion.
No one's forced to do it. So that's the other thing. No compulsion.
Asking questions versus giving answers.
We're trying to make these into questions rather than, we have the answer.
Public participation.
The ARC will open itself up to widespread public membership as rapidly and extensively as is practically manageable, at as low a cost as is possible and desirable.
If those are their only 3 principles, they are doing worlds better than the WEF. Now, let's move on to something that I think is worth actually focusing on, is why they want no compulsion. Because there is a bit of a deeper reasoning for that. It's not just because it's like, oh, let's just be nice and not force everybody. Dr. Peterson actually does express a much deeper reasoning towards that. And it actually does benefit not only society, but also benefits the alliance as well.
You get the best out of people if they're voluntarily on board. You don't want to play a game with someone who's been forced to play with you. Now that's the definition of fatal social catastrophe, even when you're a kid. Your neighbor's mother has to tell his son, your neighbor's mother.
All right, Dr. Peterson gets his words a little jumbled up here, all right? But it's like this. It's like Jimmy has to ask his mom to ask your mom, and then your mom has to ask you to play with Jimmy. And now every minute you have to hang out with Jimmy is like pure hell because you don't want to be around Jimmy. And the reason you don't want to be around Jimmy more often than not is because Jimmy's a dick. And that's why Jimmy has to ask his mom, and his mom has to ask your mom, and your mom has to ask you. And in this world that we live in, Klaus is Jimmy.
That's not going to be very fun for you or for him. You can't have an optimally structured social organization that relies on involuntary participation. So, voluntary establishment. Well, why maximally attractive? So that people will be on board without compulsion. Because one of our principles is all policy that requires compulsion is suboptimal. Now, you have to use compulsion on criminals now and then, psychopaths, people who just will not abide by any set of principles whatsoever, except the advancement of their extraordinarily narrowly defined self-interest. But other than that, if you set up an organization and people aren't willingly on board, you haven't developed your vision properly. And so we want to do that collectively in response to the questions that admittedly we are putting forth.
See, that is another thing. I've said this before in the last video, that there's certain things that if they can stay true to, this can actually be something that will be massively impactful in the world. If they can stay true to that tenet of if people aren't on board just voluntarily, then they basically what he's saying is that they haven't done their job. They haven't done what they're supposed to do. They haven't brought forth ideas or a vision for the future that's good enough yet. If they can stay to that and actually look at our participation as an indicator of how good they're doing, well, then this is pretty, like, it sounds like the way the government should work. It sounds like real democracy, in my opinion. Like, they bring an idea forth, nobody joins, and then instead of being like, listen, this is what we're doing, they go, well, I guess this isn't good enough. And then they actually have to question, they have to come to us and say, what would you like to see? Because we just brought this forth. Nobody wants to join. Nobody wants to join up. Nobody wants to participate. What is it that we're doing wrong? Please include your opinions until we're at the point where everybody wants to be a part of this. That is the way things should work, in my opinion, of course. Now, let's wrap things up with the hopeful vision. At least that's what I like to call this part. And I'm going to clarify one thing that Dr. Peterson says at the end.
We have therefore initiated the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC, a new movement of hopeful vision. Well, they say the people perish without vision. What is hopeful vision? Well, hopeful vision is what you're working toward. You know, you think, well, if I could have things this way in my family, in my life, in my community, that would be worthwhile. I could get on board with that. Well, your vision of the future that attracts you and also provides you with security and direction, orientation that unites you with others, that's your hopeful vision. And you perish without that. And hopefully through discussion and negotiation, we could develop something approximating a collective hopeful vision that we could all be on board with. Like, part of that for me is, well, how about if we work as hard as we can, as quickly as possible to ameliorate absolute poverty? We provide inexpensive energy as widely as possible everywhere in the world and lift people out of the poverty that, what would you say, compels them to adopt a cataclysmically short-term vision of the world. Now, you know, you might say, well, that's not priority number one. It's like, fair enough, we could have a discussion about what priority number one might be, but that's, for me, at least, an element of what might constitute a hopeful vision. And I think it's a realistic one, too, given that rich people care more about the planet. They can afford to.
So when he says that, it's not that rich people have more heart than the rest of us, have more sensibilities than the rest of us, or have more virtue than the rest of us. That's not what he means when he says that. And actually, I'm going to play this clip. It actually delves deeper into what he means when he says rich people care more about the planet.
Instead of scrabbling around in the dirt trying to get lunch, and you're going to burn everything up around you to stay alive if you have to.
Right.
But if you got a bit of wealth and now you can think over, maybe a 20-year period, which is quite the damn luxury, then you actually start being concerned about, the quality, the aesthetic quality of the local environment.
So that's what he means when he says that. It's not that rich people care more. It's that they actually have more time to care about things like the planet. It's like, someone in the West, they're like, oh, please, we have to stop the hunting of lions. And then there's somebody in an African tribe and they're like, I don't care about what you're talking about. I have to kill this lion. It's food, and also it attacks my village. I have to. I'm not sitting around having a discussion about this. This needs to happen now for us to survive. It's like the people in Sri Lanka right now. You might look at them and say, you can't be burning wood. That's not good for the environment. They're just like, well, what's not good for my environment right now is that I starve to death and I need to cook food. So I need to burn this wood, and I'm not going to talk to you about this right now. This is what I have to do in this instant right now. So it's not that rich people actually care more about the planet. They just have the time to care about things like what trees are in their local area and whether or not they're going to do a cold plunge and whether the sauna they get in is an infrared sauna or a steam sauna.
Hello, friends. So I went straight from the ice bath into the sauna, and I have to tell you, there is no comparison. The ice bath is way more challenging. The sauna is challenging because right now I'm at 27 minutes at 185 degrees, and I don't really want to be in here anymore.
That was episode 2 of the Arc Files. Thank you so much for watching this far, and just think about what kind of world do you want to live in. Right now, Dr. Peterson is painting a certain vision that he has in mind that he's hoping that everybody's on board with. We've had people painting visions for us, dystopian, apocalyptic visions. And what really is important, which is why I like the Arc so much, is that what you think matters, what you think the world should be like, what you think, how you think the world should be built. That's what truly matters. And the more we start to think about it, the more we can look around and see what we will accept and see what we will not accept on this planet. So, with that, I leave you with this last clip. If you found any value, please subscribe.
And here's the basic rule. All the responsibility you abdicate will be taken up by tyrants.